first and foremost, I feel I'm quite confident and optimistic because things are really not going very well for them. They are not going to put out a press release and proclaim to the world that they have failed. They should, but they probably won't. And so, for 2024, I'm very optimistic, and I'm looking forward to, working with people to just push out. If people could mute, that would be great. I think Aviva, if you would be able to mute, that would be fine. Or if you could mute them for me, that'd be awesome. There's reason for optimism. Now, that doesn't mean that we're claiming victory and that we can sit back and do nothing. But I personally am a little bit tired of the fear mongering where people are saying and projecting off into the future that this horrible thing is going to happen and that horrible thing is going to happen. The way I have been talking about this for the entire time is by saying, well, this is what they are trying to do, and we will not allow that to happen. And so the status of the situation as we speak right now, please understand that we have three separate things to talk about, and I'm going to try to compartmentalize them. The first one is what most people call the pandemic treaty. It's now really officially called the pandemic agreement with their latest document. But their negotiations for that are not going well. Many of the nations that have submitted text have complained that their submissions are not being allowed in to the negotiating draft. Now, technically, the latest document said that it was a proposed text for a negotiating document. And the WHO speaks as if all of the nations have accepted that document as the text that is being negotiated. But many nations have not accepted that. They very clearly said that they do not accept it. So in their last meeting in December of the intergovernmental negotiating body for this, I'll call it the treaty, they were sent back to do a rewrite, and that is scheduled to come out sometime, maybe late January, probably early February. And their next meeting is a 2-week marathon session at the end of February. So at this point in time, while I talk about the pandemic treaty, please understand that it's being rewritten, and a new version is due maybe next month sometime. We'll put that a little bit on the back burner and talk about that if people want to.
James, may I ask you for a moment, please?
Please.
Because I remember that there was a version, I think that was published somewhere in October. That was a completely new one? What happened with that one?
That is called what I just mentioned. They have referred to that as the proposed
text, okay.
Negotiating text for the pandemic agreement. And I'll take a moment to give, I think Philip is holding it up.
Yes, correct. We can see that. Thank you, Philip.
I'll try to give you a quick little history, okay? The first working draft that they had was in July of 2022. Then they came out with the conceptual zero draft in November. Then in February, they came out with the zero draft. Then in April, they bumped into a serious problem that they've tried to keep quiet. They were not getting along in their negotiations in the April meeting. And what they said in April was, okay, to all of the member nations, please submit whatever text you would like to have in the negotiating draft by April 22nd. And what they created from all of those submissions is something that's known as the compilation text. It's purported to be a 208-page document, and that is top secret. I have never seen it. If anybody gains access to it, you'll be my hero. They are hiding that information that many nations submitted text to. I was able to find a 60-page collection of information that the European Union had submitted. I made that public back in March. But that particular 208-page compilation text is very valuable because they're keeping it very secret. Instead of publishing what all of the nations said they wanted and adhering to what they claim, and I believe they are lying, they claim that it is a member nation-led process. But the member nations' submissions have been rejected by the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body. And what they came out with in June was a Bureau's text that was 43 pages long, where the compilation text is 208 pages. All summer long, the nations were very unhappy that their 208 pages of text had been whittled down to 43 pages, and they demanded that the Bureau go back and rewrite it again. Now, one would have expected that the document would get a little bit larger, but it actually got smaller, and it became a 30-page document, which is the one that פיליפ was holding up. And so the nations, I believe, are now even more unhappy because what they are being, what they're presenting, what they want to have in what is considered to be the negotiating text has been rejected by a bunch of bureaucrats. And so it calls into question, who's really running the show here? Is it, the Secretariat and the Bureau or the European Union or the United States, or it certainly is not the member nations. And so it's in the state right now of they've been directed to rewrite it again, and we will see it when we see it, whenever they present it. Their next meeting is in the last 2 weeks of February. So that's all about the pandemic agreement or treaty. I want people just to understand that regardless of what the details are, that is considered to be a framework convention. And that's really all you need to know. That would set up a conference of the parties. That would be a totally new bureaucracy. Now, if you're aware of the Framework Convention for Climate Change that the United Nations adopted in the United States, passed through the Senate, and pretty much every other nation on the planet is a party to the Framework Convention for Climate Change. They just had their 28th Conference of the Parties in December, and thousands upon thousands of people showed up. And a framework convention is structured where they meet year after year after year after year, and all of the nations have agreed to abide by whatever they decide. I'm just morally and completely and totally opposed to the idea of a framework convention. And I want to address an issue that maybe פיליפ, can talk about a little bit later. When Tedros says, "Oh, this is fake news. We're not taking away your sovereignty. The pandemic accord," which is really not the proper name, but that's how he refers to it, "will not transfer sovereignty to the WHO." You have to understand that he's manipulating the language by telling a partial truth. The way it's structured right now, the pandemic agreement would empower a totally new bureaucracy, the Conference of the Parties. Now, any nation who sent a delegate to the yearly Conference of the Parties would have input into those decisions, but it remains to be seen. In the current document, the last time I looked, there was no way for nations to reject any additional protocols. And so anyone who becomes a party to that agreement, in my mind, is handing over control to an unelected, brand new bureaucracy. So when Tedros says, oh, it's not going to transfer power to the WHO, he's splitting hairs. It definitely would transfer authority over to the Conference of the Parties. And all you have to do is look at how the Framework Convention for Climate Change is messing up our world, because we agreed to abide by what they decide year after year after year. Okay, so enough about the treaty. The amendments that are currently being adopted are voluminous, hundreds of proposed amendments that go all the way back to September 30th of 2022. They kept it secret until December of 2022. So we have known what the original proposals are for more than a year. The rule in the International Health Regulations, Article 55, and I've published videos of them clearly stating that they know the rules, are that any nation can submit amendments, but they have to do so 4 months in advance of the assembly. Now, when I first got involved in this, I discovered a document from the Biden administration that was very quietly submitted on January 18th, 2022, which was 4 months in advance of the May assembly. Well, they kept it very quiet, and they never published it on a public website until April 12th. I found it earlier than that and started reporting on it. And so the obligation falls upon the Director General that if he communicates any proposed amendments, it has to be done, tell all of the nations that here's what we're asking you to consider at the May Assembly. That has to happen before January 27th. That's 4 months in advance of the May meeting. Well, in October, they had a meeting and they very clearly said, I'm not, just saying this, I have all the video, I've been talking about this for 3 months. They said that they know that they are having difficulty reaching agreement and they are not going to meet their deadline. Now, if they were honorable people, there would have been a press release and they would have said what they said in their meeting. And they would say, look, we tried. There's 196 nations that are party to the International Health Regulations. We've got hundreds of pages with hundreds of amendments. We are unable to meet our deadline. So sorry, we'll give you a progress report in May of 2024, but we now have to strive to make changes in 2025 because we failed to meet the deadline. Well, I'm not holding my breath waiting for that press release. What they then went on to do is, and I'm going to use the word conspire, they conspired in public and they talked for an hour, and I have that video on my Substack article, that they want to believe that those rules do not apply to them. So there's a number of things that might happen. I suppose it's possible that they could somehow reach an agreement and the working group could submit a true package of amendments that would be considered, but they don't have any meetings scheduled between now and January 27th, so they would have to call an emergency meeting to make that happen. They might do absolutely nothing and just try to keep it quiet, but that's not going to work because we're all paying attention. What they said they were going to do is really weird. What they said they were going to do is submit the originally proposed amendments from September of 2022, along with, and now these are their words, whatever version is on the screen at their December meeting. Now, they said this back in October. Well, that's just a weird thing to say. And so one of the delegates from Monaco let a little secret out. She asked, oh, well, are we going to submit the version that they received during the summer? Now, I have not seen or heard anything more than that, but apparently, because of what she said, there is a newer version that no one has been allowed to see. Possibly they might submit that. I don't know what they might mean by submitting the version that was on screen during their December meeting. I suspect that they will submit some kind of a document and create some sort of attempted legal justification where they don't need to follow the rules and they can just keep negotiating right up until the last minute before the assembly. And as far as I'm concerned, and I'll leave it to Philippe to talk more about the legal aspects of it, that is absolutely unacceptable. And so they have already scheduled meetings for beginning of February and in April. Now, if they had said, well, we're not going to be able to adopt anything in May, but we're going to keep working, okay, that would be fine. But they want everyone to fall asleep and not pay attention. They want to keep these negotiations going, and they want to believe that they're going to be able to get away with, at the last minute, presenting something that no one has had an opportunity to see, and then go through some sort of voting process to adopt it. I'll leave it there for the second set of documents, the amendments, and then I'll talk briefly about what they did in 2022, but then I'll leave it to Philippe to give you more about that. Many people are aware that there was a group of 5 articles that had amendments proposed in May of 2022. And it was purported that those amendments were adopted. They published a document on May 28th, 2022. At the top of that document, it has their legal counsel's name, and it says that it is an authentic, document. They categorize what the new changed 5 articles would be. They like to say that only one of those articles was of substantive nature, but I personally disagree with that, because they actually added an authority that never existed before in Article 62, which is previously, it was not an authority given to the nations to make reservations to amendments. It was only reservations to the original version of the regulations. So
James, if I may push back and ask more or less a leading question. On May 22, right after the convention, they published the new version to be admitted, and that was end of May or beginning of June, 27th of May or 28th of May 22. It's as if they've written down in the resolution the phrasing of the new 5 different articles. So we are talking about these articles, are we not?
Yes.
And these are the ones who were automatically accepted by default on end of November. If you can elaborate.
That is what we're talking about. That shortened the time frame for rejection and entering into force. Yes. And so the document in question that I'm talking about was published on May 28th, 2022. And I'll pass it over to Philippe, because in reality, while they claimed that was adopted during the 8th plenary session, the sessions are recorded. And if you watch the 8th plenary session, they never voted. And so Philippe can tell you about the letter that was written by the members of the European Parliament on November 28th, 2023, where they wrote a letter to the WHO Director General Tedros and essentially said, if you cannot produce evidence that these proposed changes were voted on, then they are null and void. And I don't believe that they are ever going to provide evidence. So I am operating under the reality that they attempted to commit fraud. And I'll pass it on to Philippe, and thank you very much for listening.
Yes, thank you very much, James. And thank you very much, Hagar, for the invitation, and to everybody for listening. Yes, I gladly take it over from here. So James mentioned these three important documents or three important changes that are subject to debate right now. The current changes, notably to be the WHO pandemic agreement with the latest version of 30th of October last year, and then the amendments to the international health regulations, where James mentioned absolutely correctly, we are still today only with the publicized amendments that were published end of 22, December 2022. I posted the link into the chat, and now to avoid any confusion, the third document James was referring to, that's the modified Article 59 and some subsequent articles in the international health regulations that was voted upon by the WHO's World Health Assembly in May 2022. And to reduce it to the core point here, this Article 59 was referring to shortening two periods of time. Period number one was the period for coming into force of any change, any amendment to the international health regulations. That period was previously 18 months, shortened down to just to 12 months now.
The rejection period went from 18 to 10 months.
Yes.
And the entry into force was from 24 down to 12.
Yes. Okay. I'm just returning from the mountains. So that's right. The period, and that's very important actually for the democratic process. If you think of some amendments just being voted upon by an assembly, World Health Assembly in Geneva, where nobody takes notice of in the different countries, and only upon the publishment of this vote. And here we are talking about a change that was published on 28th of May 2022. So only then actually people were allowed to take notice of this little change, of this reduction of the periods. It takes quite a while to initiate a public debate and then to make your government submit this notice of rejection in order to not make it come into force. So to avoid any confusion, this time for making this rejection used to be 18 months, and it has been reduced to just 10 months. So within 10 months, this is where we stand right now from the perspective of the WHO. And James pointed out that this vote, where this significant change was voted upon on 27th May 2022, has most likely a significant flaw, a significant problem, procedural problem. And that is, if we look at the material that we have at disposal just the vote of the subcommittee that prepared this final vote for the entire World Health Assembly. There we see actually this the president of this subcommittee summarizing more or less the debate that preceded the 10 minutes before, and just saying, oh, so I guess now we have all come to the point where we can accept these modifications. So I don't see any objections. Are there any objections? No. And then he hammered down with his hammer and declared these amendments to be adopted. We don't, what we don't have, yes?
Philip, if I am not mistaken, also there was not a big enough quorum inside. You can see from the video of that incident that there are not even 50% of the seats taken in this hall of subcommittee. So this is also another reason, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. So there are actually procedural rules in the basic documents of the WHO, and you will find these procedural rules in on the WHO's homepage. And there is this procedural rule number 73, which says that the Health Assembly shall normally vote by show of hands, except that any delegate may request a recorded vote. And so there's another sentence with respect to electronic system, where an appropriate electronic system is available. The Health Assembly may decide to conduct any vote under this rule by electronic means. That means that one way or the other, you have to count the votes. Why? Because for changing the international health regulations, you need a simple majority. So 51% of the present votes. If you just say, oh, we assume that there is no objection, and then if you ask into the plenum whether there is any objection, yes or no, that is not what Article 73 of the procedural rules say. So under these circumstances, this team around this European member of Parliament, Rob Rose, wrote this letter. 12 members signed it. I guess it was around the 27th of November, and asked Tedros, the General Secretary, to produce evidence that indeed there was a simple majority, that the hands were counted. So far as I know, no response came. So as we can assume, they will then just confirm that they did not receive a response, and that thereby we must all consider what James said, this vote to be null and void. The problem here is a little bit that it is not about any third party to declare this vote to be null and void. It should be done by a member state, right? So it would be helpful here to have a member state declare that, but still to shed the light on malpractice is of course of importance, because with all of these letters combined together, the public attention will grow on the general problems we face with WHO. But this was one aspect. It is not all what needs to be said here. But we are now under an official regime whereby WHO claims that we have just 10 months from the moment on where these major amendments that are still subject to negotiation, and where we just have so far the version of November, December 2022. So once they are adopted, and the plan is May this year. Now this coming May, once they are adopted, probably end of May, then the clock is running 10 months. So we all in our countries will have 10 months time only, provided, of course, this regime of reduced periods of time of 10 months will apply. Of course, in my opinion, in James' opinion, and in yours opinion, I guess as well, there should be at least 18 months. And but this is the official framework we are all working in. Now, James, you mentioned an important point here, and this is the perception, or let's say the public advertisement that is done by Tedros and by all the officials who say that this agreement and these international health regulations amendments will not take away any sovereignty from the countries. And I think there are many more reasons actually to exemplify, to make it very clear to everybody why these amendments, already the amendments, will take away sovereignty. And that is, you know, very, for me as a constitutional lawyer, we operate in our countries always under the premise that we have a split of powers and there is checks of balances. And whatever one branch of the power does, there is another branch that can actually correct an error. With the WHO, we will not have that. And more significantly, the General Secretary, just in his single person, should these amendments come into force in the present wording, he will be entitled to call out an emergency, a public health emergency of international concern or of regional concern, or just a provisional emergency, without any possibility, without any mechanism for a review and for a correction. And so if there is no control upon Tedros, if we as a member state, or if a member state just for himself cannot initiate, cannot have an effective way of stopping an unnecessary and just planned or designed public health emergency, then this by definition is ceding sovereignty. And I hope, as this Zoom, I guess, is public, maybe somebody from the WHO hears that, this is the key number one reason why we in our legal community or activist community, we have to make the case that these amendments will make our countries lose sovereignty. Because number one, there's no control of the secretary that is considerable or equivalent to what we always call the checks and balances system. But there are more to that. I guess you know them all. Number two is that so far we can read in the official statements from officials, whether it is from the United Nations, from WHO, and in the paper and the amendments themselves, we can read that the recommendations shall become legally binding just by reading the text. The member states commit to execute and to perform the recommendations of the WHO. We have 3 articles where we can see that very clearly. So again, if recommendations are seen to be legally binding, then there is an instance above our countries for an unlimited time allowed to define the priorities of our policies, literally what kind of variant of a virus to chase, or to what level of CO2 our economies are allowed to produce, and so on. And number 3 point, I find it actually the most varying point, and that is in both agreements visible the new pandemic treaty and in the revised international health regulations, and that is this notion of infodemics, whereby WHO declares wrong information or too much information as dangerous as a virus itself. So deriving from that logic, the authority to to define the information that is considered to be in line with WHO and which shall then be actually controlled by the member states. We all know a good decision-making always depends on an open debate, on a free exchange of information. If you eliminate that, you don't have any science, by definition. You don't have any justice, a legally functioning justice, and you don't have any democracy. And we have clear indication, not only from these two agreements or proposals that are on the table, whether we speak about this WHO pandemic agreement of 30th October, we have that in Article 18. That's unequivocally very clear. It's for everybody who has on its hand this Article 18. It's a communication and public awareness article, and in the international health regulations, I think it's Article 43 or 44. We have, yes, and then also if you go back into the communication of United Nations, they've had a General Assembly in September last year, and they wanted actually to commit the United Nations countries to sign both of these international WHO agreements or amendments, and they failed. The nations did not accept to sign a formal United Nations declaration. So the United Nations had just to issue a public statement, but still in this public statement, it's a political declaration. An important point is, again, this infodemics. And it says that one of the biggest problems of COVID-19, this crisis, was that the member states had to fight so much wrong information, so much disinformation. Therefore, in these two new, in the new pandemic treaty and in the amendments of the international health regulations, this must be a key point to fight disinformation or misinformation. So these three elements that I just mentioned this is not conclusive, but if we speak about whether countries will lose their sovereignty, yes or no, and then WHO's Director General wants to tell us no, by no means will countries lose their sovereignty, he is wrong. He is totally misleading, because he will hold in his hand the power to declare an emergency, to define what shall be considered correct information, and number three, he will be in the position to, just by issuing what he called recommendations, that will then be actually seen as legally binding orders. So that, if you ask me, if you would ask any serious constitutional lawyer or professor or expert, this is by definition losing sovereignty. And now coming to a point, my last point, what do we do with all of that? I think we have to be, not too over-ambitious. We cannot convey all these procedural details to our fellow citizens or to politicians. In my view, the most important thing is to make them aware that this process is going on and that WHO wants to get much more powers concentrated in their hands, the hands of just one person, and that they want to have more money that they want to base this power on 2 new legal instruments, where one is truly new, this new pandemic treaty with the actual name WHO Pandemic Agreement, and the other instruments are the international health regulations. And they want to do it without having done a proper after-action review, without having undergone a serious self-assessment, whether the lockdowns actually were producing more harm than good, whether the mRNA-based substances produced more harm than good. We still have on the WHO homepage an appraisal of this very dangerous, very harmful technology, and whether WHO's own management altogether produced more harm than good. And so this is unthinkable for any organization led by humans to assume more powers and more money after such a period of so devastating effects on humans' lives, on our economies, and on so many people's health. And so this is, in my view, the most important, to actually raise attention into our citizens. Please have a look, take this serious. This is very mature, this topic. We are not talking about something taking place in 10 years under many premises. No, this is going on. And WHO has declared a clear target, and that is next May. They want to have voted on these 2 new legal instruments. And, you know, if we all want to keep on with your life, with your personal life, with your self-determination over your health, self-determination also about your personal life in general, then please join us in exercising pressure. And that's the second element. We need to exercise pressure on our politicians. And this is what people can do. Actually, of course, James and me and many other experts, we are involved very specifically in, bilateral talks, behind the scenes talks with politicians to make sure that they understand their responsibility they have now and to awake them. Number 3 is, of course, we will have to go onto the streets before May this year, and of course after, when things do not go as they should go. And we will work together over the borders of our countries, because we are all concerned in the same way, whether we live in Israel or in the United States or somewhere here in Europe. And one last mentioning, really one last remark, sorry for this long statement, but one advantage we have, and that is, it seems that in all of our countries, politicians and officials use the absolute same very simplified and wrong arguments. They all say, oh, let's look at the international health regulations. These are just technicalities. So don't worry about these technicalities. It's actually only about the experts to discuss. Now, as we just said, or as I just pointed out, there are a long list of issues that are absolutely not technicalities, but they will change our constitution, and they are outside of WHO's own constitution. We don't find anything like information control in the WHO's constitution. And so it shows that politicians in all of our countries are using the same bad and stupid arguments to actually make the public think that this is just one of many not important international negotiation procedures going on, and we can continue our own lives without engaging into that aspect. And here we face the same stupidity, we face the same enemy, and this is how we can work together on this basis. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
If I may just add two things that I thought of as פיליפ was talking. I'll put a link in the chat. One of the things that is in the year-old version of the proposed amendments are a series of amendments, primarily from the European Union, but many other countries, that seeks to install what they refer to as a global digital health certification network. By any other name, it's a vaccine passport that would require a vaccine certificate, a testing certificate, a prophylaxis certificate, a recovery certificate, traveler locator forms, and passenger health declarations. They want it all to be tied to a QR code so that, basically they could restrict travel internationally. Now, the reason I mention it is while I have every faith that we're going to stop them from implementing that as part of the international health regulations, that type of passport already exists. This is an example from the 1970s, but you can read the international health regulations and you'll see that form in Annex 6. They want to expand that dramatically, but if you do a Google search for WHO and Global Digital Health Certification Network, you'll see that they're busy building it. So if they don't get their way and make it part of the international health regulations, they'll just roll it out on a voluntary basis. And the leaders in many countries may very well adopt it. And you know how that goes. You have something that's voluntary and everybody gets used to it. And then suddenly everyone accepts it and it has to be. So we very much have to be on the alert for what they call the Global Digital Health Certification Network. One last thing, I will be publishing, I hope, an article in the next couple of days about the opportunity to comment coming in the next few weeks about the 14th General Program of Work. Zimmer, if you have a question, go right ahead and I'll come back to the program of work.
Yes, regarding the digital ID passport, we captured a clip that came out just after the last convention. That should be, if I'm not mistaken, on the 3rd of June, immediately after the convention, where Tedros and the EU commissioner for this subject declared the collaboration starting from 1st of July 2023, meaning that the WHO adopted the digital passport that was rolled out in the EU, and it declared that it is formally considering the 1st of July 2023 as the starting date for this project. I don't know what jurisdiction they have, but I'm just mentioning that this is already happening de facto.
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly the thing that I'm talking about. And as I said, if they don't manage to pass this through as part of the international health regulations, they'll set it out as a voluntary program. Essentially what happened at that time, and it was very seriously misreported by many people. On June 30th, the European Union's vaccine passport system ended its lifespan. And so they essentially, these are my words, they took the digital carcass and the EU gave it to the WHO with an agreement that, whatever the protocols were and all the software, it would give them a starting point to build that into an international system to put together everyone's database so that it would be interoperable around the world. They probably already have it built, and they're just waiting for the time, to make it be available. In many jurisdictions around the world, throughout Europe, פיליפ can talk, more about that than I can. some of the nations, Sweden, they already have such digital passport applications for your phone or whatever it may be. And so the danger is that they offer it as a voluntary service. And the vast majority of people are likely to fall for it, not realizing that the convenience that it may offer is very, very treacherous. Okay, so we are talking about the same thing. The second thing I wanted to say was the general program of work. I'm going to translate this in my own common English, right? The WHO is begging for money. They only received in 2022 maybe $500 million in assessed payments from the various nations. They're trying to increase those assessed payments over the next 4 years to try to double them. But 84% of the money that they get is donated. Most of that donation does not come from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Most of it actually came from the United States and the European Commission and nations like Canada and the UK. So nations give additional money. The United States gave $750 million over and above our assessed payments in 2022. And those extra donations, along with money from Bill and Melinda Gates and Gavi and all the other many foundations, come with strings attached. So the WHO doesn't get to do whatever they want to do with all of that money. They have to do what their donors tell them to do with it. And so their general program of work is going to be considered both at the executive board meeting, which is January 22nd to the 27th. Their executive board will be meeting at the end of January, and then it will be considered formally at the World Health Assembly. Essentially, they want to try to raise donations of $11.3 billion. And, you know, at the end of 2024, they're planning a big fundraising event. So keep your calendars clear. Maybe you'll get invited and you can donate to their cause. But the point is, there will be an opportunity for people to give public comment. I hope to be publishing that article shortly. My friends at the interestofjustice.org are working very closely with that. And I'll be trying to reinforce the work that they're doing to raise the awareness that, you know, not only is the WHO having difficulty reaching agreements with the amendments and the new pandemic agreement, they're now currently, you know, looking to raise money. They don't have a solid budget, and if we make enough of an noise within our own government, the United States government is in the middle of the process of determining appropriations, you know, how much money we're going to spend. And at this point in time, the House of Representatives has a bill that has been passed that has zero money for the WHO, no money whatsoever. And I encourage anybody in any nation to encourage not just you know, defunding the WHO, exiting the WHO as well. And you know, we have legislation in the United States. You can go to stoptheglobalagenda.com to see the legislation being promoted to exit the WHO. In Canada, there's the canadianpetition.com. There's a petition in the United Kingdom to do the same. And in Australia, you can go to australiaexitsthewho.com. And you folks are obviously doing very similar work. I encourage you to consider working within whatever structure you have to either start a petition or craft legislation to exit the WHO.
Yes, and I can say that we are definitely busy with this. So far, we've sent several letters to various people within our government to try to raise their awareness. One thing that I wanted to update you, the two of you actually, and maybe our audience. today, actually, though I think it is from today, an article was published in a doctors only website. One moment, I need to mute somebody here. 1 second. I don't know who this is, but can you please mute yourselves? There was an article that was published on a doctors only website with all kinds of quotes directly taken from our website, where the former head of the European chapter of the WHO for the last 17 years, Dorit Nitzan, reacted to the arguments that we brought throughout our website. And she also gave some arguments about, she responded to the question of sovereignty, of loss of sovereignty, where she said, no, there's not going to be any loss of sovereignty. Of course, that's very much expected. And then she said as well that there is nothing yet that we need to reject or approve, because these all these texts are just temporary and are being discussed at this moment. And I think I know that I read the article, and I was actually laughing because it's really gaslighting 101. It's gaslighting for the basic, because you know, we feel like we don't have to wait until these things are final and voted for and approved in order to raise the red flag. So yeah, that was a very interesting development from today, I think. Yes, go ahead, Philip.
Thank you. This is a very important point. You know, if we have these texts now in front of us, if we see infodemics, if we see Article 3 in the International Health Regulations, this infamous Article 3, Paragraph 1, where they crossed out human dignity and human rights. So then this person, every official should say, oh no, this happened by mistake. This is absolutely not what we want. This is an example of a text that is still subject to negotiation. Don't worry, we will bring that away, because our country is based on human rights, and our country is based on the rule of law. And we want to be sure that nothing happens into the wrong direction. So you're right to raise your point of objection to this article, Paragraph 1 amendments. We will make sure this is a way. And what we don't see that. What we see is exactly what you just summarized. And this, in my view, the same happens also here in Switzerland. We just had a big article of this leading diplomat who leads negotiations for Switzerland. Her name is Nora Kronig. This article dates from 5th of December. She said exactly the same. Oh, this is, you know, absolutely not been taken seriously. Don't look at these texts. They are still subject to negotiation. So why can't these officials say, we stick to human rights and none of these results will be accepted, and we will not vote in favor of it if something of the like is still in there, and all the other points I just mentioned before as well.
I would like to add, I tried to get access to that website and have to become a member and all that sort of thing. So hopefully I'll get a chance to read that later. But you have to understand that they choose their words carefully. I have never heard Tedros say that the amendments to the international health regulations would not take away your sovereignty and give more power to the Director General. He chooses his words very carefully. He says the pandemic accord. Well, quite frankly, there is no such thing as a pandemic accord. He's not speaking to a specific document. He's manipulating the language to manipulate people's minds. And so when you see people saying these things, they're using a technique to be able to say something that has a veneer of truth to it while they're ignoring the details that would invalidate the very thing that they're saying. And you can argue with them until you're blue in the face. Don't waste your time. Find people who look at this information and are enthusiastically opposed to it, and build your group larger with people who don't, are not victim to all of that propaganda. You can spend an awful lot of time trying to convince people who do not want to be convinced. I suggest you spend your time building your organization to be as large as it possibly can. And then when you reach out to that person, you do it in a focused way. And you have each and every one of the members of your group, and you choose, who you're going to present information to. Now, if you take that person and you get their contact information, and you have hundreds or thousands of people reach out directly to that person and overwhelm them, that's the tactic to use rather than to try to argue with them on social media. It's a different approach to how you build the resistance. Don't try to convince people who cannot hear and will not hear a word you say. Get hundreds and thousands of people and then document what they said. Document what they claimed, whatever, article you find. Record it, publish it, highlight it. Put it in your record banks because it'll disappear at some point in the future. And then when you have thousands of people and you go to them and you say, look, this is what you said. And you have not just you talking to them, but you and thousands of people. It's a different dynamic. At this point in time, they have a point. We do not have a current version of either document. So focus on the things that you have that are substantial. Where is the proof that a proper vote and a proper quorum were there in 2022? Get additional lawyers together in Israel and take up that documented case of fraud in my mind. Okay? At the very least, they failed to conduct their administrative procedures properly. We have a deadline of January 27th where if you accept what they say, that, oh, well, this is all being negotiated, so, don't worry about it yet. Okay, fine. But as of January 28th, that argument is no longer valid. After January 27th, we demand to see whatever the proposed amendments may be for this May's assembly. And if we don't see them on that date, they are not under, they do not have any legal claim to be able to make changes at this May's assembly. Now, with the treaty, that's a different discussion. And if you read the treaty, it very clearly says in there, well, we want nations to, write their own laws and they're sovereign and all that. They put those words in. They put the words in about respect for dignity, human rights, and fundamental freedoms. The trick that they are playing there is they want to create a totally new bureaucracy as the conference of the parties, have that meet year after year after year. They could have a blank agreement. It keeps getting smaller. They could agree to the tiniest little bit of things. If we allow them to create a conference of the parties that has authority to make decisions year after year after year into the future, that's what they really want. They want to create a new bureaucracy, throw billions of dollars at it, and get nations to agree to an empty agreement so that they can claim that, oh, they're so successful. They're now saving the world with their pandemic agreement. and it'll come back to bite us year after year after year after year.
Yes, thank you so much, James. Zema, do you want to give a little update of what has been done so far?
Yes, I would like to use a few minutes of your time to update our honorable guests about and reciprocate for their efforts. So what we are doing is basically we are trying to attack most of the issues James and Philip address and focus on, with of course some obvious adaptations. First of all, we are very weak on the legal side. Unfortunately, we don't have a big depth of legal power. But the upside is that Israel is a very small country, small not only in number, but also in the connection points between you, the citizen, and the member of parliament or other dignitary that is, you know, holding the stakes. So basically, we are relatively to other countries, I guess, to some other countries, it is relatively easy to get the initial attention of some of the members of parliament. And as you suggested, we are mostly focusing on the ones which are tending to our side, meaning that we're not trying to convince people who are unconvincible or people who have too much to lose if we succeed, but rather to find the people in parliament and in the actual government that will take on what we say and at least be able to read into it with some attention, because you know the claims are very obvious once you give the basic time to read. So we are finding some members of parliament to work with. Of course, I will not be naming names here. People who are in the know, they know it. Some of them are initial contacts that we do not want to declare out in the open before there is progress. But we are using this attribute of Israel being a small country with relatively ease. You can attain telephone numbers of members of parliament and ministers. We are using a two-pronged attitude. One is that mostly Hagar and me and Orit and other people in the team are focusing on, is the quiet backstage work face-to-face with the decision makers and members of parliament and ministers, and a very large group of people, good people, some of which are here in the in this meeting, that do the more exposed work. There are more than 54,000 signatures already in our site. So there is a quite substantial backing for our ideas and claims. But at least in the wider public, there's a lot of people listening very carefully to what we say. And it cannot pass without mentioning the 7th of October attacks on Israel, which also changed the game on the WHO's issue. They changed the game very much. Without going into politics, there's not one person in Israel, I guess, that doesn't know by proxy at least someone who was hurt by this attack. And, you know, as you know, the situation and war is continuing in the south and in the north. So in parliament, there is a tendency to only deal with what is critical and to this emergency warlike state. However, we find that at least because we connect the WHO attack on freedoms in a more live and sanguine and more illustrative way, because as you know, as our soldiers fight in Gaza, for example, you have the WHO supporting hospitals which were holding live hostages, etc., etc. So regardless of the facts which are out there, what I'm just saying is we are trying, I would say a little bit manipulatively, but I'm not ashamed to say that we are trying to use this to our advantage, in the sense that it heightens the awareness of our members of parliament to the evils of this organization and its likes. Obviously, it's not just the WHO, it's the UN and other wings of that organism, that Goliath or Tower of Babylon. We also estimate that they will not be successful, but we still have a lot of work ahead of us. We worked very hard and intensively leading to the 1st of December. We failed. There were some successes, I have to say, and some of these successes were not in the sense that Israel objected, because it did not object. It did not object to the at least to the first round of the changes that they introduced. But we did find a few situations where we managed to put ministers, Ministry of Health, for example, on the spot and press them such that they had to react. And while they reacted, they did some mistakes which we are using to the best of our ability. So I think we see there, for example, we see this article that was published that Hagar mentioned a few minutes ago. For me, and it's obvious that the person who written it is a soldier of the WHO in Israel. She's playing this role. She's doing it for gain, personal gain, obviously. But regardless of that, these attempts to put us in a position as if we are creating the fake news and the misinformation are quite literally pathetic and will not succeed. We've already issued a few Freedom of Information Acts in Israel. Specifically, latest one was directed to 5 different ministries of government to ask them what negotiations, what not intergovernmental, but rather interministerial negotiations inside Israel happened, and these Freedom of Information Acts letters were sent to the Prime Minister office, the Justice Ministry, the Health, the Treasury, etc. And all of them came back with an answer that they don't have any available information, literally meaning that none of these negotiations involved any of those other ministries. And, you know, as you well know, these pandemic treaty, pandemic accord, the amendments, 300 plus amendments to the IHR, they all involve different walks of life, you know, some of which I mentioned, and belong to the jurisdiction of these ministries, which as we put them on the spot and found out that they were not involved. So we are gathering momentum to show that these procedures are not only illegal when it comes to the WHO forum in Geneva, in the yearly convention and the ongoings, but also inside Israel. And people are very sensitive to the issue of sovereignty. But one of the issues that we encounter, which is very highly problematic, you know, we show our claims, we meet the decision maker or the minister, and we say, look, this amounts to ceding the sovereignty of the nation, of the country, to an international organization. And their initial response is typically, no, but it doesn't say that really. Well, of course, you know, we are not stupid. If they want to cede our sovereignty to them, they will not write, you shall cede sovereignty, but it is implicated by reading and understanding the sum of at least a few of these articles. And when you bother to read it, even for a few minutes, it is very, very obvious. So basically, I would say that we are making a lot of progress, still got a lot of work ahead of us in the coming months, but we are very optimistic that we will be successful. And these small indications that we have along the way lead us to think that we are on the right track. Doesn't mean that we can you know, rest, put our feet on the table and lean back and rest, but rather to focus our efforts on the two prongs that I mentioned, the quiet one, heading the decision makers, the ministers, etc., and the parliament, to raise discussion there, behind closed doors and in front of the closed doors, and out in the open. And also in the wider public through our internet site and other activities that try to and accomplish making the general public more knowledgeable about these things. We are getting excellent feedbacks and very good involvement. And I think that leading up to coming May, we will have very good results. And hopefully, these results, once they are shared, can help assist other countries in doing the same with applicable modifications, obviously. We do find that, you know, I personally meet a lot of decision makers, members of parliament, etc. One recurring theme is that they all ask, so what are the other countries doing? They are like little children, you know. They want to go to the party, but they want to know what the other kids are going to wear, etc. You know, so this is a recurring question that we always hear in these meetings. What are the statements given by other countries? What are their intentions? And what has been publicized by the made public by the WHO, which obviously wants to keep these things as quiet as possible, under a rock if they can. And every exposure helps to push that away from our futures. So that's more or less it. I will not go into more details, but just to let you know that we are trying to adapt the Israeli activity to the Israeli situation and to exploit as much as possible our situations with the plus and minuses that it has, obviously. This is our reality here. We have to make the best lemonade that we can make out of these lemons, I guess. Thank you both for attending today and updating us. That's it from me. Hagar, take it away.
Yes. Thanks very much, Zimmer, for this wonderful overview. Yes, we have a good translation as well in the chat. There's one last question maybe for Philip, or yeah, maybe for James too, that I was personally curious about. Is there, let's say, coming May, they vote on these documents, whatever state they are presented to the member states. Is there such a scenario possible where instead of an actual official vote, they will also conduct a similar thing like they have done in September, or in with the political declaration, like a silent procedure, or the vote in May 2022 that we've seen on the video? What do you think?
Yes, everything is possible here. And as James already mentioned, behind the scenes, we have indications that the countries are absolutely not in line with everything that is on the table. We have many countries, they are not prepared to give more money, or countries who are not prepared to allow their intellectual property to be shared. And interestingly, in our newspaper here in Switzerland, right before Christmas, there was a 2 sides big article from the perspective of the Swiss pharma industry, written clearly, you could say that, against the WHO treaty, but just from this very narrow perspective of we do not want to share our intellectual property rights with other countries. And there might be other countries with other motives to object. So that would be a big blowback for WHO to have a dissent in next May. And so then they would probably step back and use the same way that was used by the United Nations last September, and just issue a political declaration and saying, oh, these are the points we are still d'accord. We still want to pursue more powers to WHO. We want still to fight infodemics. We want still to make sure that only WHO has the leadership, the global leadership, to effectively fight epidemics and so on. But we still need a bit more time for coming to the final versions. Yeah, absolutely, this is possible. And I just wanted to add to what Zemer just said, the summary of all your endeavors. I find this is exactly the way to go. This is exactly the same I am trying to do here, to engage politicians into the situation. We ask them questions. How do you assure that under the new regime, looking at these wordings of the International Health Regulations amendments, still human rights are protected, that emergency power is not abused, that actually censorship will not be introduced, because it jumps into our eyes if we compare these amendments and Article 18 of the New Pandemic Treaty. It jumps literally into our eyes that the only driving force behind that is to create censorship. So what do you do actually to prevent this from happening? And then when you come back, or when you get back these non-answers, that of course for the moment it's frustrating, but just imagine next May, when then your representative would then vote in favor of such an agreement. That would give you and all of us a lot of ammunition for our next steps of public campaigning, saying, look, our government, that we informed them, we made them aware of all these problems, of all these elements of totalitarianism that were here on the list. They didn't react. They always said it was just a new draft. And at the end, they even voted in favor of it. So now it's time for the people to come together and really communicate a very, very strong message. So I just wanted to say that it's the right way to go, although we don't get the answers that we would like to receive right now. But this is evidence that is needed for our campaigning in the future.
Yes, but they are certainly reacting, because they are reacting to us tickling them. And I think this is a really good sign, especially,
Yes.
you know, if we are getting a response from someone like Dorit Nitzan, the former head of the European chapter of the WHO, that's quite high. That's already above, what's his name? Professor Asher Salmon. He's the head of the UN, of the WHO say delegation to the of Israel. So, you know, it's like it's coming up. We're seeing that they don't like what we're doing, and that's why they're trying to dismiss us. But that's not going to go so easy.
Hagar, I would like to add,
yeah,
two more small points regarding what Philip just mentioned. One regarding the IP, I see it as the IP rights issue in general, I think is one of the biggest flaws that they have in this structure, in this Goliath Tower of Babylon type structure, and the reason is that the IP rights, the intellectual property rights of this industry is a prerequisite for any profit making, and the large profit making that they had, if they cede, if they negotiate or cede the IP rights to any kind of other wealth sharing or rights sharing, they will have mostly what to lose. And the biggest countries to be the losers are the farmer centralized countries, Switzerland, the US, Germany, well, all the big donors to this WHO, obviously. So this is one place where I think they have an internal weak spot that should be pressed on, because this will help us topple this thing from within. The next thing I wanted to mention is a thought that, as you talked, Philip, I was reminded by, in a sense, one of the claims of politicians and decision makers we are meeting is, what do you want? These documents are not final. Obviously, we would not cede any kind of sovereignty of Israel to an international organization. Trust us, don't worry about it. But these documents are not final. And obviously, we know that it doesn't matter that they're not final. Just the fact that they are willing, for example, to strike out human rights, even if it's not in the final version, just the fact that it was not thrown out of the room, out of the window, in the first second that this idea came to be.
Absolutely, that's what I mean.
Just shows that it is in the spectrum of the possible in their thinking. And this is totally unacceptable. But the next stage for me, which I try to adopt in front of this decision maker, is to say, don't tell me this is not a final document. And when the final documents come, you will make sure that none of this turns out to be. Israel is involved in the INB negotiations. It is involved in the WGIHR negotiations and the inter negotiations as well. So don't tell me what you will do when you have the final version. Tell me, what are you doing now inside the INB, inside the WGIHR, to make your influence, to make sure that this is not in the final version. And of course, then the room is typically goes quiet, because they don't know these things. We suspect for a long time now that the Israeli representative, and of course, I'm saying this as a hypothesis. I don't know if it is for sure, but we hypothesize that the people in the Israeli Ministry of Health, which are in the international wing, and like the life in Geneva and these negotiations, let's simply say that the best interest of Israel is not necessarily in their eyes. So this is a thing we have to push as well. And I suggest that other countries do the same, in the sense that not only don't tell me to wait for the final version and then assess, but also tell me, what are you doing now to make these changes within the INB, within the WGHR, IHR, etc. So yeah, these are the small remarks.
Thanks.
I don't know how long you folks were planning on going. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but there's a few more things I would like to say. How long were you hoping for the meeting to?
At most, I think the next 20 minutes.
Okay. Please be aware that in the negotiations for the political declaration that the United Nations still fraudulently claims was adopted by the General Assembly in September, okay? That document, the negotiation of that document was facilitated by the ambassadors from Morocco and Israel. So for them to say they don't know what's going on, and for them to not be held to task for what was in that document, they facilitated it. It was brought to an attempt to pretend that it was adopted by the General Assembly. That is fact. That is undeniable. The evidence is there. They cannot say that that was not a final document. And it was still to this day fraudulently declared to be adopted by the United Nations General Assembly. So there's a question for you to bring to them and the ambassador who facilitated that negotiation. The other thing, which I think I mentioned a little bit, and I've talked about it at length on other interviews, but I'll try to condense, a long story to a short story. Please understand why these negotiations are actually even happening. I think most people have not really grasped how this all got started. At the Special Assembly at the end of November, December 1st, 2021, it was declared that they wanted to oversee an international agreement to ensure equitable access to pandemic-related products. The nations who were relatively poor and were unable to get contracts from Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca, and so forth, at that moment in time, you got to put your head back 2 years or more, they felt that nations like Israel, who were deeply embedded with Pfizer, the European Union, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they had gotten contracts for way more of the products, the injectable products. The United States had gotten contracts for like almost all of the remdesivir that was being produced. The reason for these negotiations is that it is a trade dispute. It's got nothing to do with your health. It should be happening in the World Trade Organization. It does not belong in the World Health Organization. The people who are involved in these negotiations are way out of their league. They're not talking about health. They're talking about intellectual property and investment and manufacturing and logistics and access to pathogens and benefit sharing. And the aspect that I think everybody has forgotten or just never been made aware of, the proposed amendments from Bangladesh and the African nations for a new Article 13A in the amendments that go all the way back to September of 2022. If you haven't read those two proposals, they look very similar. They are surprisingly similar, but they are a little bit different. What those nations, the African nations and Bangladesh, proposed as a solution to this trade dispute would be, knowing that the Director General can declare a public health emergency of international concern, they wanted to also give him the authority to determine immediately what products might be needed, as if that's even really possible, okay, with an unknown pathogen. He would also then be able to set up an allocation mechanism whereby he could say to Israel, or he could say to the United States, or the United Kingdom, or Germany, or wherever, your manufacturers have to make the products that I demand you make, and you have to give them to wherever he says they need to be given. That is classic, dictatorial, totalitarian, Marxist, communist, control the means of production, logistics, and distribution. Now, in order to make that work, Bangladesh proposed crossing out that recommendations would now have to be binding. They wanted to change the definition so that the Director General's statements to Nation A to manufacture what he says and give it to Nation B would be seen as orders. And I do believe that the vast majority of people who have been talking about this have lost sight that that is why these negotiations got started. Now, that's in the amendments. When you look at what came in with the zero draft of the proposed pandemic agreement, it's a different variation on that. It's a pathogen access benefit sharing system. The wealthy nations want to mandate, using words like must or shall, that nations, smaller nations, shall build their capacity, build out laboratory networks that can do genomic sequencing, and go searching with the One Health approach into their countryside to find any new pathogens with pandemic potential, bring them into the labs, do the genomic sequencing, share that data with the WHO central hub so that the pharmaceutical companies in Germany and wherever else could manufacture pandemic-related products. And then what it currently says is that 20% of whatever they make would be given to the WHO to be distributed as they see fit. Now, that's a more capitalistic view to solve this trade dispute. Well, the poorer nations are not happy that they would be required to build out all that infrastructure to hand over pathogens to the WHO, and that they want more than 20% back. And this comes from what happened in South Africa and Botswana with the Omicron variant. People don't understand that the purpose of the current international health regulations is to prevent travel restrictions and to prevent nations from blockading some other country where there might be an outbreak of some sort. So South Africa and Botswana apparently, according to them, did the genomic sequencing on what is now known as Omicron, and they made it public to the world as soon as they found out, which is what they were supposed to do. And they were greeted with travel restrictions that hurt their economy. And I don't think they'll ever forget that. And so the reason why these negotiations are happening is the wealthy nations are profiting from what these other nations consider to be, quite frankly, national property. If they identify a pathogen in their nation, it has value to pharmaceutical companies. And they don't want to just give it away so that, because what happened with Omicron is Moderna and Pfizer turned it into billions of dollars by using that to make the booster. So these nations are looking at Israel, who had huge contracts and people got many, many, many jabs, and relatively poor nations were left without. The problem with all of this is 2 years later, they are unwilling or unable to recognize how lucky they were that they didn't get these biological weapons injected into their people. They can't even begin to see that. They've got their blinders on. They want a piece of the financial pie to build out the infrastructure to make more mRNA jabs that they control, that they manufacture, and that they profit from. And so the entire discussion is the same. They want more remdesivir and midazolam and ventilators and the types of pharmaceutical, quote unquote solutions that did far more harm, damage, and caused more death than COVID ever would have. And so they are unwilling to wake up to the reality that I suspect most of the people here have come to accept over the last couple of years. And if you forget that, if you forget why these negotiations are happening, it's because poor nations saying, oh, you guys got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 jabs, and we didn't get maybe 1 or 2. And they want some structure to make that more equitable while they're completely ignoring the harms that these treatments cause. And if you can get that point across to anybody, this entire thing should just crumble. It's absurd.
Yes, this is, oh, okay, go ahead, Philip, yeah. Here.
Yes, thank you, James. I mean, this is such a vast quantity of new provisions. It's a total new universe. And whenever we come across to an audience, we always try to find the best perspective we can with the 15 minutes or with the 30 minutes we have. Sometimes it even arrives that you just have 5 minutes. And I had an audience last summer, elderly people after a dinner, and I knew their attention span was just less than 5 minutes. So I had to improvise. And what I tried to tell them was, look, I make it really very simple. What we have here on the table is literally nothing else but an agreement between the people and some health management organization that claims to know when you are actually sick and that claims to know when the public is under a public threat of emergency for whatsoever virus. And you give them this organization your agreement to tell you when you are sick, and in case you are deemed to be sick, what kind of product to take. And most notably, even if this product has an experimental character, that still you are under the obligation to take it, right? And moreover, you give them the authority to exclude any second opinion because they don't like a second opinion. And you give them the authority actually to control your information. Would you personally sign such an agreement? Now I'm already at 2 minutes, but they still remained with me. And they nodded their head. No, we would certainly not sign such an agreement. And so I told them, look, this is exactly what is the current status of negotiation of a paper that is called International Health Regulations Amendments. So now, can you imagine that people would love and sign such an agreement for eternity to hand over the authority to an international health management organization, declaring actually and defining when we are under a state of an emergency and so on. And actually people said, well, no, we cannot imagine that somebody would say yes to such an agreement. And I said, then look, and the frightening thing is this agreement is about to negotiated and signed for you and for the entire population in a few months' time, and then it will become reality. And do you think that this really, this severe aspect of flaw overriding your intentions, your right of self-determination, that this is being healed just because your government is signing this agreement for you? No, absolutely not. So if you would sign such an agreement, actually, just speaking as a lawyer, such an agreement would be null and void. If you would make an agreement with some health manager and allowing him to impose on you whatever treatment he finds fit for you, even if it is an experimental treatment, such an agreement will be null and void. You could step out anytime and say, no, as I don't know the risks, as I don't know the benefits in advance, I'm not bound whatsoever. So as we have this agreement now signed for the entire population of all the countries, this is even more null and void. So maybe this could be an approach, but still I have not found the magic stone how to, approach people. And so I just can confirm that Samer, what you have started with your group, with Hagar, that's exactly the right way to go for, to engage into communication and not let them out. And that's the most important here. Why have we not seen yet any attempt from you as our representatives actually to make sure that human rights is truly protected, that open information is always possible, that a second opinion will always be accepted, and so on and so on. So they must be the ones who prove that they are of a good spirit and protect our rights and protect our self-determinations. They have to prove it, not we.
Thank you so much, Philip. I think these are also some good summarizing words towards the end of this meeting. Yeah, we do need to fight for the fact that, that our rights need to be protected.
Yes.
There's no question about it. It's non-negotiable, and we have to stand up for that. James, do you have maybe just a couple last words that you would want to say, and then I will close the meeting.
Just thank you everybody for giving us the opportunity to talk to you, and don't be afraid to reach out. My contact information is readily available all over the place. If there's anything I could do to help you at all, just let me know.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Also, thank you very much from my side for coming together and for our cooperation. I also stay at disposal for you, for your team to help. Absolutely.
Yes, and we will certainly, you'll hear from us for sure. And yes, thank you so much for all the support that you have given us thus far. It's not something obvious. We don't take it lightly in any way. All right, guys, thank you so much. It's been great. And לילה טוב לכולם, להתראות. And we will see you guys next time. James, I consider you by now a regular, so and Philip soon enough with you as well.
Thank you, Hagar.
Right.
Thank you very much, Samer, as well. All the very best to everybody.
Thank you. לילה טוב. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.